Dean Martin truly hated him more than anyone. Try not to gasp. Part 1. The Beverly Hills Letters. December 25, 1995. Christmas morning, Beverly Hills, California. Dean Martin dies at home, age 78. Acute respiratory failure. America wakes up to the news on Christmas Day. Dean Martin is gone. The smooth Cunard, the Rat Pack legend, the king of cool, dead. His daughter, Dina Martin, handles the estate in the weeks following, sorting through her father's sprawling Beverly Hills mansion. Then she finds something unexpected in his private study. A locked desk drawer. She forces it open. Inside, dozens of letters, some typed, some handwritten in Dean's distinctive scroll. Letters addressed to people, but never sent, never mailed, just written and stored away. The dates span decades, 1950s through 1995. Letters to Jerry Lewis, Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., his dead son, Dean Paul, and many letters about someone named Mort Viner. These weren't meant for anyone's eyes, just Dean alone at night getting thoughts out, saying things he could never say in person. The real Dean Martin behind the cool facade America loved, the cool was a prison. One letter from 1978 reads, "I've been performing cool for 50 years, and nobody knows the real me. Not my partners, not my friends, not even my children." 2024, 29 years after Dean's death, Dina Martin decides to release excerpts from the letters. Not everything. Some are too personal, too dark, but enough to finally show who Dean Martin really was. And the letters reveal something nobody expected. For decades, everyone assumed the person Dean Martin hated most was Jerry Lewis, the comedy partner, the legendary split. 20 years of not speaking. But the letters reveal a different truth. Dean wrote about Jerry with sadness, not hatred, with regret, not rage. The person Dean truly hated, the one whose name appears again and again with increasing venom, Mort Viner. Most people today have never heard of Mort Viner. Talent manager, producer, died in 2013. Largely forgotten, but for over 40 years, Mort Viner was Dean Martin's personal manager. The man who controlled every aspect of Dean's career, who created the Dean Martin King of Cool brand, and according to Dean's private letters, the man who owned him. "I should have strangled Mort with my bare hands," Dean wrote in 1987. "He owned me for 40 years. Made me perform everything, and I let him, and I hate him for it." Part 2. The King of Cool. Dean Martin wasn't born cool. He was born Dino Paul Crochet, June 7, 1917, Steubenville, Ohio. A rough steel town, son of an Italian immigrant barber who barely spoke English. Poor family? Nothing cool about it. Young Dino dropped out of high school in 10th grade, dealt blackjack in illegal gambling houses, boxed as a kid crochet, and sang in small clubs for tips. Not smooth, not sophisticated, just a poor Italian kid trying to survive. In the 1940s, Dino moved to New York, trying to make it as a singer. Changed his name to Dean Martin, worked on his accent, smoothing out the Italian, the rough edges. Worked on a persona, casual, relaxed, like nothing bothered him. It wasn't natural. It was constructed carefully, deliberately. The letters revealed this clearly. Dean's cool was manufactured, rehearsed, performed in a letter from 1960. Dean wrote, "People think I'm naturally cool. They're wrong. I rehearse everything. Practice the slouch. Time to laugh. Cool work. Hard, exhausting work." By the 1950s and 60s, Dean Martin had perfected the image. The smooth singer, the Rat Pack member, the Vegas headliner, the TV variety show star. Image, effortless, casual, cool. Reality, calculated, rehearsed, mostly sober during performances. Worked incredibly hard at making it all look easy and lonely. Profoundly lonely. In a letter from 1975, Dean wrote, "I'm the loneliest man in Hollywood, surrounded by people constantly. And nobody knows me because I show them, Dean Martin, the character, the performance. But Dino Crocetti was real, and I buried Dino 50 years ago. And now, I don't remember how to be real anymore." For people showed Dean different aspects of that loneliness. Jerry Lewis showed him that partnerships end when performing replaces authenticity. Frank Sinatra showed him that real cool is authentic, not manufactured. Sammy Davis Jr. showed him that he wasn't as loyal as he pretended. Dean Paul Martin, his son, showed him what actually mattered, and was taken away before Dean could drop the performance. But one person controlled the performance, profited from it, owned it, and Dean spent 30 years hating him for it. Part 3. Jerry Lewis. The partnership that wasn't Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin. Martin and Lewis. For 10 years, from 1946 to 1956, they were the biggest comedy act in America. Dean was the straight man. Jerry was a comedian. Together, unstoppable. Radio, television, 16 movies. Las Vegas sold out crowds everywhere. The image was perfect partnership, best friends, brothers. But the letters tell a different story. For years, everyone assumed Jerry Lewis ended the partnership. Jerry was the bigger star by 1956, more attention, more press. But according to Dean's letters, that's not what happened. Dean ended it. In a letter from 1958, Dean wrote, "Everyone thinks Jerry left me. Wrong. I left Jerry. I couldn't take it anymore, being the straight man, the sidekick. 10 years where Jerry got all the attention, all the credit. I was 40 years old, a supporting player to a guy 10 years younger. So I walked away." The split devastated Jerry. He'd loved Dean, considered him a brother. After the breakup, Jerry said publicly, "Dean never cared. Not about me, not about anything. He was cold, unfailing. I loved him like a brother. He treated me like a business associate." But Dean's letters reveal something more complicated. In a letter from 1970, Dean wrote, "Jerry said, I never cared about him. I did care, but I couldn't show it because showing emotion breaks the cool, and the cool was my protection. So Jerry thought I was cold, but I was cold because I was scared. Scared of being real?" In 1976, Frank Sinatra orchestrated a reunion, surprised Jerry on his telethon by bringing Dean on stage live television. They hugged, both cried, America cried, but the letters reveal even that moment was performance. In 1977, Dean wrote, "We reunited on TV. Everyone cried. But the truth is, we're strangers now. We were strangers even when we were partners because I never let Jerry see the real me." You can't have real friendship with a performance. Jerry Lewis died in 2017. In interviews late in life, Jerry still seemed hurt, still confused about why Dean had been so distant. And Dean's letters make it clear it was a performance. Always the performance. The cool that protected Dean also isolated him. Jerry Lewis showed Dean Martin that partnership without authenticity is hollow. That cool is lonely. Part 4. Frank Sinatra, the real deal. Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, the two biggest stars of the Rat Pack. Best friends, partners in the legendary Las Vegas shows that defined 1960s cool. Frank was the leader. Dean was his right-hand man. The image was two cool guys having the time of their lives. But the letters reveal complications. Frank Sinatra was naturally cool. I didn't rehearse it. It was just cool, dangerous, authentic, volatile, all real. Frank was completely authentically himself at all times. Dean Martin performed cool through careful control. In a letter from 1962, Dean wrote, "Frank is cool without trying. I try without being cool. When Frank walks into a room, he owns it naturally. When I walk into a room, I perform owning it. It's exhausting. Frank's cool is who he is. My cool is what I do." The Rat Pack shows were legendary. Frank would improvise, changing the show every night. Pure instinct. Dean couldn't do that. He rehearsed the spontaneous moments, practiced the casual remarks. His spontaneity was scripted. In 1965, Dean wrote, "Did a Rat Pack show last night. Frank was brilliant, pure instinct, changed half the show on the fly. I hit all my marks, said all my rehearsed ad-libs, and went home exhausted from pretending to be spontaneous." Frank considered Dean his best friend, trusted him, confided in him, opened up completely. But Dean couldn't reciprocate. In 1968, Dean wrote, "Frank told me everything about Mia. He was vulnerable. I listened, gave advice, but I didn't share anything real back because that would mean dropping the cool. Won't do that because Frank is naturally everything I have to fake." The contrast haunted Dean. Frank Sinatra could be anything. Angry, sad, joyful, violent, tender, all authentic. Dean Martin could only be cool. Dean, one note for worser years. Frank Sinatra died in 1998. At Dean's funeral in 1995, Frank cried openly, lost his best friend. But Dean's letters suggest Frank lost Dean Martin, the cool guy. The performance, he never really knew Dino Crochet T. Frank Sinatra showed Dean Martin that authentic cool beats are manufactured cool every time. That being completely yourself is cooler than any performance. And Dean knew it and couldn't change it. Part 5. Sammy Davis Jr., the abandoned brother. Sammy Davis Jr. was the most talented member of the Rat Pack. Could sing, dance, act, play instruments. The most gifted performer in the group. He was also the most vulnerable. A black man performing in 1950s and 1960s America, facing racism constantly. In Las Vegas, where Sammy performed 2 sold-out crowds, he couldn't stay in the hotels where he headlined, couldn't eat in the restaurants, and faced segregation. Daily. Frank Sinatra especially stood up for Sammy, demanded hotels integrate, and used his power to fight for his friend. And Dean was friendly, professional, but when loyalty required risk or sacrifice, Dean was absent. In 1960, during the Kennedy campaign, Sam's engagement to white actress Mae Britt created problems. The campaign asked Sammy to postpone his wedding until after the election. Sammy agreed, postponed his wedding for the campaign for his friends. Frank was outraged. Dean Martin said nothing, did nothing. In a letter from 1960, Dean wrote, Sammy postponed his wedding for us, and I said nothing because defending Sammy publicly would damage my image, so I let Sammy sacrifice alone, and I'm a coward for it. The pattern continued as the civil rights movement grew. Some venues didn't want integrated acts, wanted Dean solo. Dean took those bookings. In 1965, Dean wrote, took a booking in Miami, whites only club, big money. Mort said the money was too good to pass up. I agreed. Sammy heard about it, called me. I said, business decision. He said, I understand, but I heard the hurt in his voice, because money mattered more than loyalty. Sammy Davis Jr. was loyal to Dean Martin for 40 years. Dean gave measured performances of friendship. In 1968, Dean wrote, Sammy would take a bullet for Frank, would probably take one for me, and I wouldn't take a bullet for anyone because taking bullets breaks the cool dot. So Sammy gives everything to friendships, and I give calculated friendliness. That's not friendship, that's exploitation. Sammy died in 1990. Dean attended the funeral, cried publicly, but in a letter after Sammy's death, Dean revealed, went to Sammy's funeral, cried, and I realized I'm performing grief. I don't know how to feel these things authentically anymore. Even at my friend's funeral, I'm thinking about how the crying looks. Sammy Davis Jr. showed Dean Martin that he wasn't actually loyal. That cool detachment is just selfishness with better marketing. Part 6. Dean Paul Martin, the son. Dean Paul Martin was born November 17, 1951. Dean's son with his second wife, Jean Beeger, named after his father Dino. He grew up during his father's peak fame. Tried entertainment, formed a pop group, Dino, Desi, and Billy. I had some success. Then I tried acting, small roles, nothing major. Then he found his real passion, flying, joined the California Air National Guard, became an F-4 Phantom pilot, finally felt like himself. But the relationship with his father was complicated. Dean Martin was a distant father, always working, always performing. In 1970, Dean Martin wrote, Dino was almost 20 years old, and I barely know him. I've been there physically, but emotionally absent, because letting him see the real me means dropping the performance. So, he has Dean Martin as a father, not a real father, a performance of a father. Dean Paul married, had a son named Alexander, then divorced, and continued flying. March 21, 1987. A routine training flight. Dean Paul Martin, aged 35, piloting an F-4 Phantom jet through the California mountains. The weather turned bad. The plane disappeared from radar. It crashed into San Gorgonio Mountain. Both crew members were killed instantly. Dean Martin found out from television news, watching TV. Suddenly, his son's face appeared on the screen. Air National Guard pilot Dean Paul Martin was killed in a crash, and something in Dean Martin broke completely and permanently. For the first time in 50 years, the cool disappeared. Dean was real, and the real Dean was destroyed. In a letter dated March 22, 1987, Dean's handwriting was barely legible, shaky. My son is dead. Dino is dead. And I never told him. Never told him I loved him. Never let him see the real me. Was always performing, always Dean Martin. Cool, distant. And now he's dead. And I never got to be real with him. Never got to be an actual father. And he died never knowing how much I loved him. Because I couldn't drop the performance long enough to say it. And that's the worst thing in the world. Dean Martin fell apart after his son's death. Stopped performing regularly, canceled shows, withdrew from public life, stayed home, drank heavily, became a recluse. In 1989, Dean wrote, "I died when Dino died. It just took my body 8 more years to catch up. Nothing matters anymore. My son is dead, and I never told him I loved him. That's all that matters now, and it's too late." Friends tried to help, but Dean was unreachable. Locked in grief, locked in regret. In 1994, Dean wrote, "I performed for 50 years, performed cool, performed not caring. But the one time I needed to drop the performance with my son, I couldn't do it, and now he's gone. And my son died never knowing the real me, and that's unforgivable." Dean Paul Martin's death destroyed his father, showed Dean that everything he'd built was worthless compared to being real with the people you love. But even that devastating loss wasn't the person Dean hated most, because Dean Paul didn't betray him. The person Dean hated most was the one who controlled the performance for 40 years, who owned Dean Martin and wouldn't let Dino Crochet breathe. Part 7. Mort Weiner, the owner. Everyone expects the answer to be Jerry Lewis, the famous split, the legendary feud. But the letters reveal a different truth, a name most people have never heard. Mort Weiner, born in 1927, died in 2013. Talent manager, producer, worked behind the scenes for decades. Most of the public never knew his name. But for over 40 years, Mort Weiner controlled every aspect of Dean Martin's career, and according to Dean's private letters, controlled Dean Martin, the person. They met in the early 1960s after the Martin and Lewis split. Dean needed new management. Mort Weiner stepped in, had a vision for what Dean Martin could become, and that vision was brilliant commercially. The Dean Martin Show, Vegas headliner, recording contracts. Mort Weiner turned Dean Martin into a brand worth millions. In 1965, early in their relationship, Dean wrote, "Mort is a genius, made me the solo star I always wanted to be, made me rich beyond anything I imagined, made me the king of cool. I trust Mort completely." But over the decades, the relationship changed. Mortiner didn't just manage Dean Martin's career. He manufactured Dean Martin, the brand. Every aspect was controlled. Every booking, every contract, every song choice, the drunk persona. Dean was mostly sober, but Mort pushed the drunk act, the cool detachment. All of it managed, packaged, and sold. Complete control, and Dean let it happen because it made money. But in 1975, Dean's tone had changed. Mort controls everything now, and I let him. I just show up, perform cool, and collect the check. But sometimes I wonder, am I Mort's client or his product? Does he work for me, or do I work for him? The answer became clear over time. Dean was the product, Mort was the manufacturer. In 1980, Dean wrote, "Mort turned me into a product. Dean Martin, the brand, the commodity, and I let him because the money was good. Because performing was easier than being." Everything shifted after Dean Paul died in 1987. Dean wanted to stop, wanted to retire, wanted to grieve, but Mort pushed him to keep working. Shows were booked. Contracts were signed. In 1988, Dean wrote, "Dino's been dead a year, and Mort has me booked for concerts. Says I need to work. He needs me to work, because I make him money, because the Dean Martin brand is profitable, and my grief is bad for business. I'm expected to perform through it. I don't work for Mort. I'm owned by him. I'm his product, and products must perform even when they're broken." Dean did perform some shows in 1988 and 1989. They were terrible. Dean forgot lyrics, seemed lost, clearly suffering. The audience was uncomfortable. In 1989, Dean wrote, "Performed in Vegas last night. Forgot the words. Stood on stage not knowing where I was, but Mort was backstage. Can't cancel. Too much money involved. So I performed my grief. The audience pied me. Mort collected the check. And I understood I'm his asset, his commodity. The commodity must perform even when dying inside. By the early 1990s, Dean had mostly stopped performing, became a recluse. Then came the breaking point. Dean confronted Mort about everything. In 1991, Dean recounted the conversation. "I want to stop. My son is dead. I'm 74. I'm done. You have contracts, obligations, people, or you, depending on Dean Martin, continue to generate revenue. I made you. After Jerry, you were a has-been. I made you the king of cool, made you a legend, made you rich. You owe me. I've been paying you for 40 years. You've been paying me commission, but I made you, built the Dean Martin brand from nothing. Without me, you're Dino Crocetti from Steubenville. Nobody. I own Dean Martin because I created him." And that was the truth that destroyed whatever relationship they had left. Mortner was right. He did create Dean Martin, king of cool, manufactured the image, controlled the brand, and Dean Martin, the person trapped inside that creation. In 1992, Dean wrote, "Mort said he owns Dean Martin." And he's right, because Dean Martin is a performance, a product, a brand. And Mort created that brand, controlled it, profited from it for 40 years. I performed what Mort told me to perform for 40 years, and I hate him for it. Hate him for turning me into a commodity, but mostly, I hate him because he's right. He does own Dean Martin, because Dean Martin isn't real. Never was just a performance Mort packaged and sold, and I let him. Dean Martin spent his final years mostly isolated, refused Mort's booking attempts, stayed home, drank, smoked, waited to die. Mort Viner remained Dean's manager until Dean's death, handled estate negotiations afterward, and took his percentage to the end. In 1994, Dean wrote, "I've hated people in my life. Been angry at Jerry, been jealous of Frank, been ashamed about Sammy, been guilty about Dino, but Mort. I hate Mort more than all of them combined because Mort owned me for 40 years, owned Dean Martin, controlled the performance, profited from it. Mort didn't just manage my career, he owned my life and I let him, and I hate him. And I hate myself for being weak enough to let it happen." Mort Viner showed Dean Martin that for 40 years he'd been a product, not a person, a performance controlled and sold by someone else. And Dean died hating him for it. Part 8, Epilogue, The Christmas Death. December 25, 1995. Christmas morning. Dean Martin died at home in Beverly Hills, age 78, alone in his bedroom, the king of Coolgone. The obituaries celebrated his career, the Rat Pack legend, the Vegas shows, the TV variety program. They mentioned he'd become reclusive after his son's death, but mostly they focused on the legend. None of them knew about the letters, the 40 years of hidden truth, the loneliness, the performance that became a prison. In Dean's final letter, written December 24, 1995, the day before he died, "It's Christmas Eve. I'm dying and I'm alone," which is appropriate. Jerry's still alive. We reunited on TV, but never really reconnected because I never let him in. Frank died 3 years ago. My best friend, who never actually knew me, just knew Dean Martin. Sammy died 5 years ago, loyal to the end. And I was never loyal back. Dean Paul's been dead 8 years. My son who died never knowing I loved him, because I couldn't drop the performance long enough to tell him. And Mort Viner is still out there, probably already, planning how to monetize my death because I'm still his product, even dying still his commodity. I've been Dean Martin for 50 years. Kinda cool, and it was all performance, all manufactured, all controlled by Mort and maintained by me because I was too weak to be real. Dino Crocetti died in 1940, and now Dean Martin dies too, and nobody will ever know the difference. The cool was a prison. Mort was the warden, and I served my sentence voluntarily for 50 years because being real was scarier than performing. Merry Christmas. Try not to gasp. Dean Martin died the next morning. Mort Viner handled the estate, continued managing the Dean Martin brand, took his percentage, made money off Dean's death just as he'd made money off Dean's life. The king of cool, who spent 50 years performing coolness, who died alone on Christmas Day, still hating his manager, still wishing he'd been real. Try not to gasp, not at the hatred, but at the waste, the loneliness. The 50 years of performing that ended with death alone on Christmas, That's the real Dean Martin story. Not the cool guy making it look easy, but the scared guy working desperately hard to look effortless. The lonely guy surrounded by people who never knew him. The letters revealed it all. The truth behind the legend. The person behind the performance. Dean Martin, the king of cool. The loneliest man in Hollywood.